When I was a kid, I loved science fiction, and having lived nearly 5 full decades, I have seen some of the technological concept envisioned in science fiction become reality. James Bond's watch, featuring a full-color, high-resolution LCD display, presaged the iWatch by about 30 years. David Drake, in his Hammer Slammer series, envisioned a defense system for tanks involving radar-guided mines that would destroy incoming anti-armor rockets and missiles. Rafael Industries made it reality for the Israeli army about 30 years later. John Scalzi, in his Old Man's War series, envisioned something akin to portable ammo factories for troop weapons. Now, I don't know if we'll see anything quite like that in about 30 years, but the very beginnings of that, specifically dealing with 3D printed ammo, might become reality if an aerospace engineer in Tennessee has anything to say about it. And it's gotten at least one of the usual characters in gun control concerned about it. The Trek seems to have some sort of objection to Atlas Arms based on its ideology, but I very seriously doubt that any of its staff have ever read Atlas Shrugged. Then again, given gun control's love for statism when convenient, the book's anti-statist message might very well be distasteful for those who prefer the government to be in control of everything. And that includes making sure that the government has better firepower than the citizenry, as exemplified by the numerous remarks made by its fangirls that only the military and police should have guns. But that's inimical to the sentiments of at least one founding father, namely James Madison, who said in Federalist 46 that a citizenry that was at least as well armed as the government was one of the ways to keep government in check. This was echoed by Scalia in the Heller decision. Now, while gun control folk can only quote 2 words out of the entire opinion, namely, not unlimited, they seem to be very unaware of what the rest of the decision has to say. In the very same section that contains their favorite 2 words from the entire decision, it also reads a few paragraphs down. It may very well be true today that a militia, to be as effective as militias in the 18th century, would require sophisticated arms that are highly unusual in society at large. And this is Mr. Jones' point with what he calls the Dagny dagger. Should the government be the only one with access to certain types of arms and ammunition? He doesn't believe so. While it is only in the developmental stages right now, Atlas Arms is planning on releasing the specs so that it can be manufactured using a CNC mill. Now, the particulars of it are still being worked out, like handling raw materials on the user end, and so on and so forth. And currently it's only being developed for the 9mm, but there are plans on developing it for other calibers, like 10mm, 40 Smith & Wesson, 5.56, and 308. But it circumvents regulation. Regulation that was often without a cause. The hype over cop killer bullets in the 80s and 90s, which was further sensationalized by movies like Lethal Weapon 3, was often just that, hype. Policy was more out of speculation rather than experience. The one recorded instance where cop killer bullets were actually used in 1983, the Winchester Black Talons were proven to not have inflicted any worse wounds than any of the other ammunition the gunman had fired. This hype was resurrected in 2015 with a proposed ban on 5.56mm M855 ammunition, which was really only a thinly veiled attempt to restrict AR-15 ownership. Like with previous attempts to ban ammunition, no real-world evidence was presented to show that the ban itself was actually necessary. Now, despite the fact that M855 ammunition was popular with AR-15 shooters for decades, largely because it was inexpensive, there was nothing presented that showed that this ammunition was used against police officers. I have no reason to believe that the Dagny dagger represents an especial threat to police officers, especially given the cost involved in making a single 9mm round. $1 to $2 per round, and that's after you've invested all the money in milling equipment and the raw materials to produce the rounds. Criminals tend to prefer crime with a cheaper price tag. Another more serious reason why the M855 ammunition ban failed was because the ATF tried to disregard its own definitions for armor-piercing ammunition, and we called them out on it. You see, For the M855 to fall under the ban, it had to be able to fit into a pistol, which it could thanks to pistols that were built on an AR-15 lower. But the bullet also had to be composed of certain materials that were defined by the ATF, which the M855 did not. So what you had here was the Obama administration trying to use an executive agency to play fast and loose with its own rules in the interest of advancing the administration's goals of gun control under the auspices of safety. But if an agency can readily do that, then it should be of greater concern if said executive agency or an administration can easily skirt around the Constitution with such means. But gun control rarely takes that into account.